Elena's hands shook as she folded the last of her belongings into a small cloth bundle. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of hoping, 3 years of disappointment. Her husband Miguel was gone now, killed in that terrible mine collapse just 2 months ago. The whole town had mourned for a day, but Elena's mourning would last forever. "Hurry up, woman." Carlos, Miguel's older brother, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "The wagon leaves at sunrise, and I won't have you making them wait." Elena looked around the small adobe house that had been her home. The kitchen, where she had cooked countless meals, hoping that good food might somehow help her body do what everyone expected it to do. The bedroom where she had prayed every night for a child that never came. The little garden where she had grown herbs and vegetables, keeping her hands busy when her heart felt empty. "I said hurry up." Carlos stepped into the room, his face hard as stone. "You've been nothing but a burden on this family. Miguel should have sent you back to your parents years ago." Elena's throat tightened. Her parents had died when she was 16. Miguel had been her whole world, and now even that world was crumbling. "Where exactly am I going?" she asked quietly, clutching her bundle to her chest. Carlos laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "There's a merchant named Rodriguez heading west. He needs workers, people to help with cooking and cleaning on the trail. I told him you're strong and can work hard." Elena felt her heart sink. She had heard stories about what happened to women who traveled with merchant wagons. They weren't really workers. They were more like property, bought and sold whenever it was convenient. "You sold me," she whispered. "I arranged employment for you," Carlos said firmly. "Be grateful. Rodriguez could have said no. Who wants a barren woman? At least this way you can be useful to someone." The word hit her like a slap. Barren. She had heard it whispered behind her back for 3 years. The women at church would look at her with pity or judgment. The men would shake their heads and mutter about Miguel's bad luck. Even the priest had suggested that perhaps God was punishing her for some hidden sin. Elena had tried everything. She had eaten special foods the old women recommended. She had prayed to every saint she could name. She had visited the curandera, the local healer, who gave her bitter teas and made her lie with her feet elevated after being with her husband. Nothing worked. Month after month, her hopes would rise and then crash down again. Miguel had been kind about it, at least in the beginning. "Don't worry, mi amor," he would say. "God's timing is not our timing. We just have to be patient." But as the months turned into years, she saw the doubt creep into his eyes. He would watch other couples with their children and grow quiet. When his friends joked about his practice with making babies, he would force a smile, but Elena could see the pain underneath. The worst part was that Elena actually loved children. She was the one the neighborhood kids came to when they scraped their knees or needed someone to settle their arguments. She could calm a crying baby faster than its own mother sometimes. She knew songs and games and stories. She could braid, hair and patch clothes, and make the best sweetbread in town, but none of that mattered if she couldn't give her husband a son. Now she stood in her empty house, about to be handed over to a stranger like a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. "The wagon is at the church," Carlos said. "Rodriguez is waiting. Don't make me drag you there." Elena picked up her small wooden cross from the table by the bed. Her grandmother had carved it for her when she was just a little girl. "Para que nunca te olvides que eres amada," her grandmother had said, "so you never forget that you are loved." Elena kissed the cross and tucked it into her bundle. She walked through the town she had called home for 3 years, past the church, where she had married Miguel with such hope in her heart, past the market where she had bought ingredients for meals that were supposed to make her more fertile, past the school where she had watched other people's children play and wondered what it would feel like to see her own child among them. The wagon was bigger than she had expected, with a canvas cover stretched over wooden hoops. 3 other people were already sitting in the back, an older man with a bandaged hand, a thin woman about Elena's age who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 14. Rodriguez was a short, stocky man with a beard that needed trimming. He looked Elena up and down like he was inspecting a horse he might buy. "This is the one you told me about?" he asked Carlos. "She's strong," Carlos said. "Good with cooking and cleaning. No family to worry about." "No children?" "No children," Carlos confirmed. Elena wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had tried, that she wasn't defective, just unlucky. But what was the point? These men had already decided what she was worth. Rodriguez nodded and handed Carlos a small leather pouch. Elena heard the clink of coins and realized she had just been purchased. "Get in," Rodriguez told her. "We leave now." Elena climbed into the wagon and found a spot near the back. The other passengers barely looked at her. They all had the same look, people who had been thrown away by the world and were now being carried to some unknown fate. As the wagon rolled out of town, Elena pressed her face to the canvas opening and watched her life disappear behind her. The church bell was ringing for morning mass. She had rung that bell herself many times, helping Father Martinez call the faithful to prayer. She wondered if anyone would even notice she was gone. The older man with the bandaged hand was named Roberto. He had lost 3 fingers in an accident at the lumber mill and couldn't work anymore. His sons had decided he was too much trouble to care for, so they had paid Rodriguez to take him somewhere where he could contribute to society in a new way. The thin woman's name was Carmen. Her husband had left her for a woman who had already given him 2 sons. Carmen's family was ashamed of the divorce and wanted nothing to do with her. She stared out of the wagon with empty eyes as if she was already dead inside. The boy, Luis, had been caught stealing food for his younger sisters after their parents died of fever. Instead of understanding why he had done it, the townspeople decided he was a criminal who needed to be sent away before he corrupted other children. They were all throwaway people, Elena realized. People who had somehow failed to be what their communities wanted them to be. The wagon moved slowly across the dusty landscape. Rodriguez rode his horse alongside, occasionally calling back instructions or warnings about rough patches in the road. He had 2 other men with him, rough-looking characters who kept their hands close to their guns. By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly. Elena shared her water with Luis, who looked like he might faint from the heat. Carmen refused any help, curling up in a corner as if she wanted to disappear entirely. "Where do you think we're going?" Roberto asked quietly. Elena shrugged. Carlos said something about work in the territories. "I heard Rodriguez talking to his men this morning," Luis whispered. "Something about trading posts and settlements, where they need workers." Elena's stomach clenched. She had heard stories about what kind of work women did at remote trading posts. Cooking and cleaning were probably just the beginning. But what choice did she have now? She was miles from home with no money and no way to take care of herself. She touched the wooden cross in her bundle and tried to remember her grandmother's words. "You are loved." But by whom? Miguel was dead. Her in-laws had sold her like livestock. God seemed to have forgotten she existed. As the day wore on, Elena found herself thinking about children again. Not the child she had never been able to have, but the children she had known and loved in her town. Little Rosa, who always brought her wildflowers. Pedro, who came to her when his mother was too busy to listen to his stories. Maria, who let Elena teach her how to embroider. She realized that in some ways she had been a mother to many children, just not in the way that counted to society. The wagon stopped for the night near a small stream. Rodriguez and his men set up their own camp a little distance away, making it clear that the passengers were cargo, not guests. Elena helped gather firewood and shared the simple meal of beans and hardtack that Rodriguez provided. As the sun set, Luis moved closer to Elena. He reminded her of her young cousin back home, all elbows and knees and nervous energy. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. Elena put her arm around his shoulders. "Me too," she said. "But being scared just means we're paying attention. Smart people get scared." "My sisters," Luis continued. "They're still back in town. I don't know who's taking care of them now." "You did everything you could for them," Elena said. "Sometimes loving someone means making sacrifices, even when other people don't understand." Roberto was lying on his back, staring up at the stars. 40 years I worked at that mill, he said. 40 years, and the moment I couldn't swing a hammer anymore, I became useless. Carmen hadn't spoken all day, but now she looked at them with angry eyes. At least you had 40 years of being useful. At least you had work that mattered. All I ever did was fail at the one thing women are supposed to be good at. Elena felt a stab of recognition. Being a wife, being anything that mattered, Carmen replied bitterly. They sat in silence for a while, 4 broken people watching the fire burn down to embers. Elena pulled out her wooden cross and hell. Ayana sat beside the cold ashes of last night's fire, watching his 3 children sleep in the early morning light. 8-year-old Takota lay curled protectively around his 5-year-old brother Nalnish, while 4-year-old Najoni slept with her thumb in her mouth, a habit that had returned after her mother died. The morning was quiet except for the soft breathing of his children and the distant sound of the camp beginning to wake. Ayana should have been preparing for the day's hunt, but instead he found himself frozen in place, overwhelmed by the simple task of caring for 3 young lives alone. It had been 4 months since Aija passed away from the fever that had swept through several camps that terrible spring. 4 months of watching his children grow quieter, thinner, more withdrawn. 4 months of trying to be both father and mother when he barely knew how to do either job well. Nijoni stirred and opened her dark eyes. When she saw her father watching, she smiled, the same radiant smile that had lit up Aiza's face every morning for the 6 years of their marriage. She whispered, using the Navajo word for father that she had learned from her mother's people. Aija had been half Navajo, half Apache, and their home had been filled with the languages and traditions of both peoples. Good morning, little flower, Ayana replied softly, using the English translation of her name. He gathered Nizoni into his arms, feeling how light she had become. She needed more food, but she had been picking at her meals lately, eating just enough to survive. The boys woke next, as they always did. Takota first, then Nalnish, following his older brother's lead in everything. Takota had appointed himself the man of the family after his mother's death, taking on responsibilities far too heavy for his small shoulders. I'll get water from the stream, Takota announced, reaching for the water vessels before Ayana could stop him. I'll help, Nalnish added, his voice still thick with sleep. No, Ayana said gently but firmly. That's my job. Your job is to be children. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. In the 4 months since Aija's death, Takota had been doing much more than just being a child. He helped his siblings dress in the morning, tried to braid Nijoni's hair the way his mother had, and often went to sleep hungry so his younger siblings could have larger portions. Ayana carried Nijoni to the stream while the boys followed behind, all of them moving through their morning routine like sleepwalkers. The water was cold and clear, running down from the mountains where the snow never completely melted. Ayana splashed some on his face, hoping it would help him think more clearly about the day ahead. He had hunting to do. The deer were moving through the valley, and winter would come eventually, requiring them to have enough meat stored to last the cold months. But hunting meant leaving his children with others, and he hated asking for help that he couldn't return in equal measure. Ayana. The voice belonged to Nasha, one of the tribal elders and a close friend of Aija's mother. She approached the stream with her own water vessels, but Ayana could tell she had really come to check on them. Good morning, grandmother, he said respectfully. Nasha looked at the children with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Nijoni, you're getting so big, she said warmly. Soon you'll be able to help the women with their weaving. Nizoni smiled shyly and hid her face against Ayana's shoulder. Before her mother's death, she had been chattering constantly, asking questions about everything she saw. Now she spoke only in whispers, and only to her family. I could take the children today, Nasha offered quietly. You need to hunt and they need to be around other people. Ayana's jaw tightened. Not because he didn't appreciate the offer, but because he knew he couldn't keep accepting such generosity without being able to give anything back. Nasha had her own grandchildren to care for, her own responsibilities. "Thank you, but we'll manage," he said. Nasha studied his face for a long moment. "Pride is a good thing, Ayana, but too much pride can hurt the ones we love most." After she left, Ayana knelt beside the stream and splashed more water on his face. He could see his reflection in the still pool near the bank. A man who looked older than his 26 years, with worry lines that hadn't been there when Aisha was alive. Back at their camp, he tried to prepare a proper breakfast for his children. Aisha had always made it look so easy, knowing exactly how much cornmeal to mix with water, how long to cook it, what wild plants to add for flavor and nutrition. Ayana's attempts usually resulted in either soup that was too thin or porridge that was too thick. This morning's breakfast was definitely too thick. Dakota ate it without complaint, but Nalnish pushed his bowl around with his spoon, and Nijoni took only a few bites before shaking her head. "I'm full, Shie," she said, softly. Ayana knew she wasn't full. She was just being polite about food that didn't taste very good. He wanted to insist that she eat more, but he also knew that forcing her would only make mealtime a battle instead of something that brought the family together. "All right, little flower," he said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. After breakfast, while he prepared his hunting gear, Ayana watched his children play, or rather, he watched them go through the motions of playing. Dakota was teaching Nalnish how to make a small bow from willow branches, but his usual enthusiasm was missing. Nalnish followed his brother's instructions carefully, but without the joy that should come with learning new skills. Nijoni sat nearby, holding the doll her mother had made for her. It was beautifully crafted from soft deer hide and decorated with tiny beads and feathers. But instead of playing with it, she just held it close and whispered to it in words too quiet for anyone else to hear. These were not the same children they had been 4 months ago. Dakota had been curious about everything, always asking to go hunting with his father, always volunteering to help with camp work. Nalnish had been the family entertainer, making silly faces and telling rambling stories that made everyone laugh. Nijoni had been their little songbird, humming constantly and dancing to music only she could hear. Now they moved through their days quietly, carefully, as if they were afraid that too much noise or joy might bring more loss. Ayana knew he needed help, but every option felt wrong. The tribal council had suggested he take another wife, but the idea made his stomach clench with guilt. How could he even think about replacing Aisha when he could still smell her scent on the clothes she had worn, still hear her voice in the wind? Besides, what woman would want to take on a grieving widower and 3 traumatized children? It wouldn't be fair to ask anyone to step into Aisha's place, to try to love children who were still mourning their real mother. Some of the unmarried women in the camp had made it clear they would be interested, but Ayana could see in their eyes that they were thinking about having their own children, not about healing the ones he already had. They were kind women, but they didn't understand that his children needed something different right now. They needed someone who could see past their grief to the bright, joyful spirits that were hiding underneath. They needed someone who wouldn't try to replace their mother but would help them remember how to smile again. They needed someone who could love them not despite their brokenness, but because of their courage in surviving it. Ayana had no idea where to find such a person. He left for the hunt feeling torn in half, part of him needing to provide for his family and part of him wanting to stay close and protect them. The deer were plentiful, and he managed to bring down a young buck that would feed them for several days. But even that success felt hollow when he thought about coming home to children who barely ate. When he returned to camp that evening, he found Dakota trying to cook dinner while Nalnish watched Nijoni, who was crying softly into her doll's hair. It was a scene that had become too familiar. His eldest son trying to fill roles far beyond his years while his younger children struggled with emotions they didn't have words for. "What happened?" Ayana asked, setting down his hunting gear, and immediately going to Nijoni. "She had a bad dream during her nap," Dakota explained, his voice tired. "She keeps asking for Shima, mother, in the Navajo language." Aisha had insisted that all her children learn both Apache and Navajo words, saying it would help them understand the wider world. Now the word was like a knife in Ayana's heart every time he heard it. Ayana picked up his daughter and held Her close. She was so small, so fragile. Her little body shook with sobs that seemed too big for someone her size. "Tell me about the dream," he said softly. "Shima was calling for me," Nijoni whispered between sobs. "She was far away and I couldn't find her. I kept running and running, but she kept getting farther away." Ayana closed his eyes and held her tighter. He had similar dreams almost every night. Aisha calling for him from some place he couldn't reach, needing his help with something he couldn't provide. "Your Shima isn't far away," he told his daughter. "She's right here in your heart and in your brother's hearts and in my heart. She'll never be far away from us." "Then why can't I see her?" Nijoni asked. It was the same question Ayana asked himself every day. Why couldn't the dead stay close enough to help with the living? Why did love have to end just because breathing stopped? Sometimes the people we love have to go to places we can't see. The wagon wheel cracked with a sound like breaking bones just as the sun reached its highest point in the sky. Rodriguez cursed loudly in Spanish as the heavy wagon lurched to one side, throwing Elena and the other passengers against each other. "Everyone, out!" Rodriguez shouted. "Now!" Elena climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs, her body stiff from days of sitting on hard wooden benches. The landscape around them was unlike anything she had ever seen. Red rock formations reaching toward a brilliant blue sky, sparse vegetation that somehow looked both harsh and beautiful, and a silence so complete it seemed to press against her ears. They were in the middle of nowhere. The last trading post had been 2 days behind them, and Rodriguez had said the next settlement was still 3 days ahead. If the wagon couldn't be repaired, they would all die out here in this beautiful, merciless land. Rodriguez and his 2 men, Joaquin and Paco, were already examining the broken wheel. Helena could tell from their faces that the damage was serious. The wooden spokes had split completely, and part of the metal rim had bent beyond repair. "How long to fix it?" Rodriguez asked. Joaquin shook his head grimly. "We'd need a blacksmith for this, and proper wood for the spokes. This wheel is done." Elena felt her stomach drop. Roberto, the older man with the bandaged hand, sat down heavily on a nearby rock and put his head in his hands. Carmen started pacing back and forth, muttering prayers under her breath. Young Luis looked around the empty landscape with wide, frightened eyes. "There's got to be something we can do," Luis said. "Like what?" Rodriguez snapped. "You want to carry the wagon on your back?" Elena walked a little distance away from the group, trying to think. She had grown up hearing her grandmother's stories about survival, about making do with whatever was available, about never giving up even when things seemed impossible. There had to be a solution. That's when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. At first she thought it might be another wagon or maybe some kind of rescue party, but as the cloud got closer, she could make out shapes that made her heart race with a different kind of fear. Riders, moving fast and purposefully toward their broken-down wagon. "Rodriguez," she called quietly. "Someone's coming." Rodriguez looked up from the broken wheel and squinted toward the approaching riders. His face went pale under his tan. "Apache," he breathed. Elena had heard stories about Apache warriors, most of them terrible. People said they were fierce fighters who showed no mercy to travelers in their territory. They were supposed to be savage, bloodthirsty, barely human. Looking at the approaching riders, Elena tried to prepare herself for whatever was about to happen. There were 5 of them, moving with a grace and purpose that was actually beautiful to watch. Their horses seemed to float across the rocky ground, and the riders sat as if they had been born in the saddle. As they got closer, Elena could see that they were all young men, their dark hair flowing loose except for the leader, whose hair was braided with what looked like feathers and beads. The leader was tall and lean, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He rode a beautiful paint horse that danced slightly as it slowed to a stop, about 20 feet from the broken wagon. The other 4 riders spread out in a semicircle, not threatening exactly, but making it clear that escape wasn't an option. Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "We don't want any trouble," he said loudly. "Just passing through." The leader of the Apache group studied Rodriguez for a long moment, then looked at each of the other passengers. When his eyes met Elena's, she felt something unexpected, not the murderous rage she had been told to expect, but a kind of careful intelligence. He was evaluating them, trying to understand what kind of people they were and what kind of threat they might pose. "Your wheel is broken," the leader said in clear English. Elena was surprised by his voice. It was deep and calm, with only a slight accent. She had expected something more guttural, more foreign. This man sounded educated, almost gentle. "Yes," Rodriguez replied cautiously. "We're trying to repair it." One of the other Apache riders said something in their own language. The leader replied in the same language, then turned back to Rodriguez. "You are in Apache territory without permission," the leader said. "That is a serious matter." Rodriguez's grip on his gun tightened. "We're just traveling through. We'll be gone as soon as we can fix the wheel." "And if you cannot fix it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena could feel the tension crackling between the two groups. Rodriguez's men had their hands on their weapons, but they were outnumbered and everyone knew it. That's when Elena heard a small sound that changed everything. One of the Apache riders, a younger man who looked like he might be the leader's brother, had a child with him. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, who was making soft crying sounds. Without thinking, Elena stepped forward. Both groups of men tensed, but Elena's attention was focused on the child. She was clearly upset, probably scared by all the tension and the presence of strangers. "May I?" Elena asked, looking directly at the leader but gesturing toward the crying child. The leader's eyes narrowed. "You want to approach my daughter?" "She's frightened," Elena said simply. "Children don't need to be frightened if there's something that can help." For a moment, nobody moved. Elena could feel Rodriguez's angry stare boring into her back, probably furious that she was interfering with his attempts to negotiate their safety. But something about the child's soft crying pulled at Elena's heart in a way she couldn't ignore. The leader said something in Apache to the man holding the child. After a brief exchange, he nodded to Elena. "You may approach." Slowly. Elena walked carefully toward the child, moving the same way she would approach a frightened animal, slowly, calmly, with her hands visible and her voice soft. "Hello, little one," she said gently. "My name is Elena. What's your name?" The little girl looked at her with dark eyes full of tears. She was beautiful, with long black hair and copper skin, wearing a tiny dress decorated with intricate beadwork. "Nijoni," the child whispered. "Nijoni," Elena repeated carefully. "That's a beautiful name. Are you scared of all these serious grown-ups talking?" Nijoni nodded, then buried her face against her father's chest. Elena reached into her small bundle and pulled out something she had almost forgotten she had, a tiny cloth doll that her grandmother had made for her when she was very young. She had kept it all these years as a reminder of childhood comfort. "Would you like to meet my friend?" Elena asked, holding up the little doll. "Her name is Esperanza. She gets scared sometimes too, but she's very brave." Nijoni peeked out from her father's chest and looked at the doll with interest. "She's little," Nijoni observed. "Yes, just like you," Elena said. "But being little doesn't mean you can't be important. Sometimes the littlest people are the most important of all." Elena made the doll dance a little, moving its tiny arms and legs in a way that made Nijoni giggle. The sound was like music in the tense silence. "Would you like to hold her?" Elena offered. Nijoni looked up at her father questioningly. He studied Elena's face for a long moment, then nodded. Elena carefully handed the doll to the little girl, who clutched it close and immediately stopped crying. "Thank you," the leader said quietly. Elena looked up at him and was struck again by how different he was from what she had expected. His eyes were kind, despite the wariness in them. His voice was gentle when he spoke to his daughter. He was armed, yes, but he held his weapons like tools rather than threats. "She reminded me of myself at that age," Elena said. "Always getting scared when the adults were having serious conversations." Something in the leader's expression softened slightly. "You have children?" The familiar pain stabbed through Elena's chest. "No," she said quietly. No children of my own. But you understand. Them. Elena nodded. I've always loved children, even if... She stopped herself before she could say, even if I could never have any. The leader was studying her with those sharp, intelligent eyes. What is your story? He asked. Why are you traveling with this merchant? Elena glanced back at Rodriguez, who was watching the interaction with growing nervousness. She could lie, make up some story that would sound more respectable, but something about this man's direct gaze made her want to tell the truth. I was married, she said simply. My husband died. His family decided I was no longer useful to them, so they arranged for me to work for Mr. Rodriguez. No longer useful how? Elena felt her cheeks burn. I couldn't give my husband children. After he died, his brother said I was just a burden. The leader's jaw tightened slightly. And this merchant, he treats you well? Elena looked back at Rodriguez again. He was glaring at her now, clearly angry that she was having this conversation, instead of staying silent and letting him handle the negotiations. He treats me like what he thinks I am, she said carefully. The leader nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. My name is Ayana, he said. This is my daughter Nijoni. The little doll you gave her, it means much to you? Elena looked at the tiny cloth figure in Nijoni's arms. My grandmother made it for me when I was very small. But I think it will be happier with Nijoni now. Ayana said something in Apache to his companions. They responded. Elena's first night in the Apache camp was the longest of her life. She lay awake on a soft buffalo hide in Ayana's dwelling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp settling down for sleep, and trying to understand what she had gotten herself into. Nijoni slept curled up beside her, still clutching the little cloth doll Elena had given her. On the other side of the dwelling, she could hear the quiet breathing of Ayana and his two sons. It should have felt strange, sleeping in the same space as a man she barely knew and his children. Instead, it felt oddly peaceful, like being part of a family again. But Elena knew she wasn't really part of this family. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She was here because Ayana had seen her kindness to his daughter and made an impulsive decision to rescue her from Rodriguez. What happened next would depend on whether she could find a way to be useful, to earn her place among these people who owed her nothing. She had learned the boys' names during the evening meal. Takota, the 8-year-old who watched everything with serious eyes and seemed to carry the weight of the world on his small shoulders. Nalnish, 5 years old, who was quieter than his brother, but had smiled shyly when Elena complimented him on how carefully he ate his food. The meal itself had been an adventure. Elena had tried to help with the cooking, but the Apache women had gently steered her away from the fire, clearly not trusting her with their methods. Instead, she had sat with the children and watched, trying to learn by observation. The food was different from anything she was used to. Corn cakes sweetened with wild honey, roasted meat flavored with herbs she couldn't identify, and a drink made from some kind of root that was surprisingly refreshing. Everything was prepared with care and shared generously, even with a stranger who had appeared without warning. Now, in the quiet darkness, Elena could hear Nijoni making small sounds in her sleep. Not crying exactly, but little whimpers that suggested bad dreams. Elena had heard similar sounds from children back in her hometown when they were scared or sick. Moving carefully so as not to wake anyone else, Elena began humming very softly. It was a lullaby her grandmother had sung to her, a gentle melody without words that was meant to chase away nightmares and bring peaceful sleep. Nijoni's whimpering gradually stopped. Her breathing became deeper and more regular. Elena continued humming until she was sure the little girl was sleeping peacefully, then finally allowed herself to drift off as well. She woke before dawn to find Ayana sitting up, watching her with an unreadable expression. You sing to her, he said quietly. Elena felt her cheeks warm. She seemed to be having bad dreams. I hoped the music would help. It did. Ayana was quiet for a moment. She has had nightmares every night since her mother died. Last night was the first time she slept through the night. Elena looked down at Najoni's peaceful face. She misses her mother. They all do. So do I. There was such pain in those simple words that Elena felt her heart ache in response. She had lost a husband, but Ayanna had lost a wife, and his children had lost their mother. The wound was deeper and more complicated than her own grief. Tell me about her, Elena said softly. Ayanna's expression softened. She was light and music and laughter all rolled into one person. She could make anyone smile, even on the darkest days. She spoke 3 languages and knew songs in all of them. She could weave baskets so beautiful that people from other tribes would travel days just to trade for them. Elena could hear the love in his voice and also the bewilderment of someone who couldn't understand why such a bright light had been extinguished. She sounds wonderful, Elena said. She was. And I don't know how to be both mother and father to our children. I don't know how to fill the empty space she left behind. Elena looked at the sleeping children, seeing them with new understanding. No wonder Dakota seemed so serious. He was trying to help his father hold the family together. No wonder Nelnish was so quiet. He was probably afraid that if he asked for too much attention, it would be one more burden for the adults to carry. No wonder Najoni clung to her doll and had nightmares. She was 4 years old, and the person who had made her feel safest in the world was gone forever. You don't fill the empty space, Elena said quietly. You learn to live around it. You help each other carry the sadness so it doesn't feel so heavy, and eventually maybe the space becomes less empty and more sacred. A place where love lives, even when the person is gone. Ayanna studied her face in the dim morning light. You sound like you know something about loss. Different loss, but yes. When my husband died, people kept telling me I needed to get over it and move on. But you don't get over love. You just learn to carry it differently. They sat in comfortable silence as the camp began to wake around them. Elena could hear voices and movement, the sounds of people starting their day. Soon they would need to get up and figure out how she fit into the rhythm of this new life. What did you do? Ayanna asked. Before you were married, I mean. What were your skills? Elena thought about it. I was good with children, as I told you. I could cook and clean and tend a garden. I knew some healing. My grandmother taught me about herbs and how to treat common ailments. I could sew and embroider. I could read and write, which was unusual for girls in my town. Ayanna nodded thoughtfully. All useful skills. The children here would benefit from someone who could teach them to read and write in English. Many of our young people need to understand the white man's language to navigate the changing world. I would be happy to teach them, Elena said, if their parents would trust me to. That will depend on how well you fit into our community, Ayanna said honestly. Some people will be suspicious of you at first. You're not Apache, and you came from the same world as the traders and settlers who have brought nothing but trouble to our people. Elena nodded. She had expected as much. What can I do to earn their trust? Be yourself. Be honest. Show respect for our ways while sharing your own knowledge. Be patient with the children and helpful with the work. Most importantly, prove that you're here to be part of our community, not to change us into something we're not. The children began stirring, and the serious conversation had to end. But as Elena helped Najoni get dressed and braided her long dark hair, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. These children needed someone who could bridge the gap between their grief and their future. They needed someone who could love them without trying to replace the mother they had lost. Maybe she couldn't be what Miguel's family had wanted her to be, but she could be exactly what Ayanna's family needed. The day brought new challenges and small victories. Elena tried to help with the morning meal and managed to burn the corn cakes only slightly. She attempted to assist with washing clothes at the stream and succeeded in getting more water on herself than on the garments. She offered to help gather firewood and came back with an armload of branches that were mostly the right size. But she also spent an hour teaching Dakota and Nalnish a simple English song, watching their faces light up as they mastered the unfamiliar sounds. She showed Najoni how to make her doll dance and march, creating elaborate stories about the doll's adventures that made the little girl giggle. She sat with some of the older women and watched them weave, asking respectful questions about their techniques and offering to help with the simpler tasks. By evening, she was exhausted but oddly happy. She felt useful in a way she hadn't felt since Miguel's death. These people didn't expect her to be perfect or to instantly understand their ways. They just expected her to try, to contribute what she could, and to respect what she couldn't yet understand. The second night, Najoni asked Elena to sleep beside her again. "You make the scary dreams go away," she explained in her serious 4-year-old way. Elena was happy to oblige, and again she found herself humming softly when the little girl seemed restless. This time, Ayana didn't seem surprised to find her singing lullabies in the dark. He just smiled slightly and settled back down to sleep. On the third day, Elena was helping to prepare vegetables for the evening meal when one of the tribal elders, a woman named Nasha, sat down beside her. "You're the one who came with the broken wagon," Nasha said in careful English. "Yes, grandmother," Elena replied, using the respectful term she had heard others use. "And you chose to stay with us rather than continue with your own people." "I did." Nasha studied Elena's hands as she worked, noting how carefully she cleaned each piece of vegetable, how she tried to copy the cutting techniques she had observed. "Why?" Nasha asked bluntly. Elena considered the question seriously. "Because for the first time in months someone asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I was worth. Because Ayana's children needed someone, and I needed to be needed. Because sometimes when one life ends, you have to be brave enough to start a completely different one." Nasha was quiet for a long moment. "Ayana told me you were married before but had no children." Elena's hands stilled on the vegetables. Here it was, the question that had defined her worth in her previous life. "That's true." "And this made your husband's family reject you?" "Yes." Nasha made a sound that might have been disgust or pity. "Foolish people. A woman's value is not measured only by the children her body can create. You have spent 3 days showing love to." 1 year later, Elena stood at the edge of the camp watching Nijoni play with the other children, her heart so full of love it felt like it might burst. The little girl who had once whimpered through nightmares now laughed freely, her voice carrying across the settlement like birdsong. She wore a new dress that Elena had sewn, decorated with beadwork that some of the tribal women had taught her to make. "Ama Elena," Nijoni called, using the Apache word for mother that she had started saying about 6 months ago. "Watch me jump!" Elena applauded as Nijoni leaped over a small log with the fearless grace of a healthy, happy child. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. This confident, joyful little girl had grown from the scared, silent child who had cried into her doll's hair that first day. "Very good, little flower," Elena called back in Apache. Her grasp of the language had improved dramatically over the past year, though she still occasionally mixed up words in ways that made everyone laugh. "She's getting so big," said a voice behind her. Elena turned to see Nasha approaching with a smile. The elder woman had become something like a mother to Elena over the past months, teaching her everything from beadwork to the proper way to tan hides. "All of them are growing so fast," Elena agreed. "Sometimes I look at Dakota and can't believe he's the same boy who was trying to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders." They both looked toward where Dakota was practicing with his bow, alongside some of the other boys his age. He had grown several inches in the past year and was becoming genuinely skilled with both bow and horse. More importantly, he was laughing and joking with his friends like any normal 9-year-old should. "And Nalnish?" Nasha asked with amusement. Elena grinned. Nalnish had turned out to have his mother's gift for music and storytelling. He could keep the entire camp entertained with his elaborate tales, and he had learned to play a simple flute that made the most beautiful, haunting melodies. He was still quiet compared to some children, but it was the contented quietness of someone who felt secure in his place in the world. "He's composing a new song about the time his father caught the biggest fish anyone had ever seen," Elena said. According to Nalnish's version, the fish was the size of a horse and put up such a fight that Ayana had to wrestle it to shore. Nasha chuckled. That boy will be a great storyteller someday. The people will gather from miles around just to hear his tales. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play and the daily life of the camp unfold around them. Elena never got tired of this view. The families going about their routines, the easy cooperation between neighbors, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself. She had found her place here in ways she never could have imagined. The tribal women had taught her their skills, and she had taught their children to read and write in both English and Spanish. She helped with the cooking, the cleaning, the child care, and the endless tasks that kept a community running smoothly. She tended to minor injuries and illnesses with the healing knowledge her grandmother had passed down to her. Most importantly, she had become a bridge between the Apache way of life and the changing world outside. More and more, the tribe needed people who could navigate both cultures, who could help the community adapt to new realities without losing their essential identity. Elena, Nasha's voice became more serious. There's something I need to tell you. The tribal council met last night. Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. Oh? There has been talk, as you know, about Ayana taking a wife. The children need a mother, and he needs a partner. It's time. Elena's heart sank. She had known this conversation would come eventually. Over the past year, she and Ayana had grown closer, but they had never formally discussed marriage. She was still an outsider in many ways, and there were several unmarried Apache women who would make perfectly suitable wives for him. I understand, Elena said quietly. I've always known my place here was temporary. Nasha gave her a sharp look. Temporary? Child, where do you think you would go? I assumed when Ayana married, his wife wouldn't want another woman living in their home. I thought perhaps I could find work with one of the other families. Or maybe, Elena, Nasha interrupted. The council didn't meet to discuss whether Ayana should take a wife. They met to discuss the proper ceremonies for his marriage to you. Elena stared at her, not sure she had heard correctly. What? Did you think we were blind? Nasha asked with amusement. Did you think we couldn't see how you and Ayana look at each other? How you work together like partners who have been married for decades? How those children have bloomed under your combined care? Elena's heart began to race. But I'm not Apache. I'm not even. You are what you choose to be, Nasha said firmly, and what this community chooses to accept. For the past year, you have lived as one of us, worked as one of us, loved our children as one of us. The council has decided that if Ayana wishes to marry you and if you wish to marry him, the tribe will welcome you as a full member. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. The council would really accept me? Elena, you've been accepted for months. This is just making it official. Nasha smiled. Though there is one condition. What condition? You have to say yes first. Elena looked around the camp that had become her home, at the children who called her mother, at the women who had taught her their crafts, at the men who nodded to her with respect when she passed. She thought about the year of healing and growth, of learning to love in new ways, of discovering that family could be chosen as well as born into. Where is Ayana? She asked. Nasha pointed toward the stream. He's been pacing down there for the past hour, working up the courage to ask you something. I think you should go put him out of his misery. Elena walked toward the stream with her heart pounding. She found Ayana sitting on a fallen log, staring at the water with the intense concentration of someone trying to solve a difficult problem. Nasha said you wanted to speak with me, Elena said softly. Ayana looked up and Elena was startled to see nervousness in his eyes. This was a man who could face enemy warriors without flinching, who could hunt dangerous game with steady hands, who had never seemed uncertain about anything in all the time she had known him. Elena, he began, then stopped and started again. This past year has been the happiest of my life. Elena finished quietly. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Mine too. I never thought I could feel this way again. Not without betraying Isa's memory, You're not betraying anything, Elena assured him. Love doesn't have limits. The heart can hold more than one love at the same time. Ayana stood up and took her hands in his. The children think of you as their mother. The tribe thinks of you as my wife. The only question left is what we think of ourselves. Elena looked into his dark eyes and saw her future there. Not the future she had planned as a young woman, but a better one than she ever could have imagined. I think, she said carefully, that I love you. Not the desperate love of someone who needs to be saved, but the deep love of someone who chooses to build a life with you. I think I love your children as if they were born from my own body. I think I love this community that has welcomed me when my own people threw me away. Ayana's smile was like sunrise. I love you too. I love how you've brought music back into our home. I love how you've helped my children heal without trying to make them forget their mother. I love how you've found a place in our tribe without losing yourself. Is that a proposal? Elena asked with a smile. Yes, Ayana said, pulling her closer. Though I should warn you, Apache marriage ceremonies are very different from what you're used to. Good, Elena said. I'm ready for something different. The wedding ceremony took place 1 month later, under a full moon that bathed the entire camp in silver light. Elena wore a traditional Apache wedding dress that the tribal women had spent weeks creating, decorated with intricate beadwork and fringe that swayed when she moved. Her hair was braided with feathers and small silver ornaments, and around her neck she wore a necklace that had belonged to Ayana's grandmother, but she also wore her grandmother's wooden cross tucked inside her dress, close to her heart. Some traditions were worth keeping, even as she embraced new ones. The ceremony itself was both foreign and familiar. There were songs in Apache that she was still learning, rituals that connected her to traditions going back hundreds of years. But there were also universal elements: the exchange of vows, the blessing of the union by the community, the celebration of two people choosing to build a life together. Takota, Nalnish, and Nijoni played special roles in the ceremony, formally welcoming Elena into their family. Nijoni presented her with a small bundle that contained a lock of Aija's hair, a gesture that moved Elena to tears. It was the children's way of saying that they understood she wasn't replacing their mother, but adding to their family's love. You are our heart mother now, Nijoni whispered as she hugged Elena tight. The mother of our hearts. The celebration went on long into the night, with dancing and singing and more food than Elena had ever seen in one place. People from other Apache camps had come to witness the wedding, and Elena was introduced to dozens of new relatives. For that's what they were now, she realized. She wasn't just marrying Ayana. She was becoming part of an